Let's talk classics. I'm going to talk about 5 of them. We're going to do some honorable mentions. We're going to do some classics that I want to read in the future. What I find beautiful about classics is not necessarily what they are saying at the time period when they were published, but how they have evolved. So when I think about these classics that I'm going to share with you that are some of my formative classics that I absolutely love, it's almost less about what the actual message is and more about how these books gave language to the feelings that I had or even didn't know that I had or was still grappling with at certain times in my life. And now every time I return to them, I read them in a different way and they become reinterpreted. I was taking a look at all of these different books and kind of thinking, were there any themes? There really are. There's a lot of women behaving badly, quote unquote badly, or kind of rebelling against the time frame where they are in or the circumstances that they find themselves in. So let's dive in. I used to be a high school English teacher and I taught 11th and 12th grade American literature, AP literature, and AP language and composition. And one of the texts that I loved teaching and most look forward to teaching was one of my all-time favorites, which is The Awakening by Kate Chopin. The Awakening is a late 19th century novel. It follows Edna Pontellier, who is grappling with her own desires and passions, going against the confines of this very heteronormative, very rigid, place women into the motherly, wifely duties and role kind of society that she is born into. And it's about her literally awakening to her desires and to really her passions in life and realizing that she has to find a way out of this. There is so much to mine in this text. What's really interesting about The Awakening is that although it is not overtly queer, it is often read through a queer lens. This woman does not feel like she should be in the circumstances within which she's placed. And interestingly, her husband is not a bad guy. He tries. Yes, he's very absent. Yes, he has his own sort of masculine qualities that he's going to make sure that he kind of follows through with, but he does try. And Edna loves her children, but she just can't wrap her head around this fact that this is her life and this is all that she has. There is interesting undertones of attraction for another woman, sort of queerness as misalignment. So if you're thinking about just honestly queering what we know to be the sort of heterosexual timeline for women, especially at the turn of the 20th century, then this really does kind of fit into that queer text adjacent realm. The ending, oh my goodness, I think it's fairly obvious from my perspective, but teaching this for so many years, my students had a different perspective. I know there are different interpretations. I think we pretty much understand what actually does happen at the end of this novel, but there's so much to it as to the choice that Edna makes and whether this ends on a very optimistic and triumphant note or whether this is meant to be read as a bit of a defeat at the end of the novel. Yes, there's a little bit of difficult language to get into in the initial chapters, but stick with it because it really does get, if you love an insular interior case study and character study, and if you love feminism and you love reading about women who are struggling against the systems of oppression that have been placed upon them, you will love The Awakening. I tend to collect multiple copies of the books that I love, and a good transition from The Awakening is Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. If you twisted my arm and said you have to choose just one favorite classic of all time, I think it would have to be Mrs. Dalloway, at least at this point in my life right now. And I have 4 different copies of Mrs. Dalloway. I didn't realize that I had 2 of the exact same. I mean, how beautiful. These are the signature classics. I am obsessed with this and this cover, but I'm also obsessed with this book itself. This is my original one that just has all of my notes in it. I have read this at different times throughout my life and I'll see my old notes, I'll add new notes. I think at one point my mom read this too and she added a couple notes also. And then this version is actually a double-sided version where on this side we have Mrs. Dalloway and on this side we have The Hours by Michael Cunningham, which is a reimagination of Mrs. Dalloway, and I adore The Hours as well. It is so well written, but I just love this version where you have one story and then you have to flip it this way for the other. Mrs. Dalloway tells the story of Clarissa Dalloway, and it tells the story of one day in her life when she is throwing a party. But it's really an exploration of memory and time and personal identity, as well as regret and decisions that we've made throughout our lifetime. We also follow Septimus, who has been back from the war and is really struggling with his own sense of the world around him. Just like with The Awakening, this really is an interior study of Clarissa and of the world she is surrounded by. She has had in the past a relationship with another woman, or there was a kiss between her and another woman. And there is this sense of constant question of what could have been. If Edna in The Awakening is awakening to the idea that she can no longer be in this containment, Mrs. Dalloway is really about what happens when you choose containment, when you kind of see what could be, and instead you decide, this is what I am going to choose, for better or for worse. Mrs. Dalloway chooses to live in a very structured, heteronormative, by the book way, and yet there are sacrifices that have to be made when that is the choice that she makes. Virginia Woolf, as a queer author herself, having emotional relationships with other women really gives extra context to this novel. It's stream of consciousness. You're in the minds of Clarissa or of Septimus, but if you give yourself time and if you just let it sort of wash over you, I love it. It is absolutely gorgeous writing and one of my all-time favorites. We can't talk about my favorites without talking Toni Morrison. And while I absolutely adore Beloved, it's The Bluest Eye that is absolutely making this list for me of my kind of top 5 of all time. The Bluest Eye, devastating, so beautifully written. It is unparalleled for teaching metaphor and teaching deep reading. There are just whole paragraphs that you can spend an entire 45-minute class period picking apart and thinking about the symbolism that Morrison is adding in, the language that she's using, the context, the themes, the tones. It just is a treasure trove of beautiful language and themes and devastating storylines. You feel for these characters so much. This is about Piccola, and she is a young woman of color who is made to think that she is not worthy because of the color of her skin, because she does not have blonde hair and blue eyes, and she wants that more than anything. And this delves into that in such a gorgeous way. I adore this every single time I pick it up again and reread it. Toni Morrison, beautiful with language, unparalleled. And the ways in which she structures the text, if you have always wanted to try Toni Morrison, a lot of people do start with Bluest Eye. It is still very accessible and absolutely beautiful. Also, I taught this in a small reading group for a group of 10th grade girls, and the depths of conversation we were able to have and incorporating in various media sources and various conversations about race and image and interiority of girlhood, it was just one of the best teaching experiences that I ever had. Definitely up there as one of my all-time favorites, and also fits into this same theme that we were seeing in The Awakening and in Mrs. Dalloway of kind of railing against the systems that you have been built into. And each novel has a different theme or message about what it is to push back against the limiting cages that have been placed around you. Now, my last 2 are going to be 2 that have really stuck with me throughout my life. I think that my love for both of them is partly because they've just met me at different points during my life. The first one I want to talk about, again, I have 2 copies, is Wuthering Heights. Now, Wuthering Heights is an interesting one because it very much, and if you think about the new movie that's coming out, it is marketed as a romance. However, I am not a romance girly. I am not really someone who finds romance to be super engaging. This, for me, is about women who don't have to go along with what they are told to do. Wuthering Heights is a gothic novel. It's all about obsession. It is about Catherine and Heathcliff. They meet when they're young, and their obsession with each other throughout the entirety of their lives. It really is about obsession and about what we will do for other people and how our personalities become shaped by other people. It's about going against the norms and being able to kind of act in the same way that the wild moors act, and being in this really deep, dark place that still can bring passion and joy in so many ways. It is about messy women, it is about, and messy men, and it is about emotional extremes. This really is in opposition to Mrs. Dalloway or to The Awakening. It's in opposition to that kind of women are needing to be in this very set box. Kathy is not that. Kathy is allowed to be kind of wild and free in a really interesting way. And love becomes feral almost here. So that's why I think I like it. This is not romance that follows compulsory heterosexuality and follows sort of the rules of society and the norms. This is like feral love, like animalistic love, and what that means for us, and what that passion may or may not give or take away from us. So if you love a good, passionate, dark gothic, this is for you. I have 4 different copies of my final in the top 5. And then we have some honorable mentions, and then we have a few that are classics that I want to read. This is Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. Now, this is a text that, if any text has followed me throughout my lifetime, it is Great Expectations. When I was in 6th grade, we first had to read Great Expectations, and it was this this is not the exact copy. I found this in a thrift store or in a library book sale, but as soon as I saw this version, I was like, this is the version that we read in 6th grade, and I had to pick it up because this little kind of paperback version just truly was so nostalgic for me. Looking back, I'm like, wow, we read this very complicated novel by Dickens in 6th grade. We did have an English teacher who really did want to challenge us, and I do think that that's what she was doing with Great Expectations. It essentially follows this young man he's a blacksmith's, not technically son, but his sister and his sister's husband, Joe, have raised him, and he is apprenticed to Joe to become a blacksmith. But he has a mysterious benefactor who ends up sending money to allow him to become a gentleman and allow him to raise his station and now start to see and feel what can he make of his life. While Pip's story absolutely resonates with me, there is one character who has always stuck with me and will always stick with me, and that is Miss Havisham. So Miss Havisham is a woman who lives fairly close by to Pip. She asks Pip to come over to her old decrepit mansion that is frozen in time because she was left at the altar. And since then, she has frozen her house, her life, everything in that time. So there is this moldy, decrepit wedding cake. There is her still in her lacy wedding dress that is falling apart and yellowing. There is the feast still laid out, getting all moldy. There's spiders and mice. It is just the most interesting look at what we do when trauma just completely freezes us. And Miss Havisham is raising Estella, who is her adopted daughter, and she's raising Estella to take revenge against men. And what is so interesting are those dynamics, and the dynamic of what happens when we are fully traumatized, when we, like in The Awakening and like in Mrs. Dalloway, when we are told we have to live a certain life as women, and then we try to do that, and we are barred from doing that from circumstances outside of our control. So she is jilted, left at the altar, and she never recovers from that. So as much as I love Pip's story, and I love the relationship between him and Joe, and I love his personal growth, and I love the twist when you find out all of kind of the unworkings and unravelings of this very detailed plot, it's Miss Havisham and it's Estella who stick with me. Hey friends, Editing Rachel here. What I didn't tell you is that actually in 6th grade, we each got assigned different scenes from Great Expectations, and we had to, within our group, act out a scene. We had to write a script and then act out the scene. And I literally played Miss Havisham. So we had to write out the scene. where Pip first goes over to Miss Havisham's estate or manor, and then my twin sister was in the group with me and she played Estella and the boy that was with us played Pip. But I literally was like wrapped in a sheet and playing Miss Havisham. So maybe that's why I'm obsessed, because I had to be Miss Havisham in 6th grade. So I read it first in 6th grade. Then it came back to me in 10th grade when I went to a different school, and now we were reading Great Expectations in 10th grade. I read it in undergrad and then in 2 separate classes in grad school. Plus, I took an extension class to finish up my undergrad, and I had to read it again. This is actually the copy I took in grad school. I took a class that the entire semester we just studied Great Expectations, and we broke up into groups and we did like radio plays of different chapters. We did photo shoots where we had to sort of capture collages of different images from Great Expectations. We did arts and crafts, and I remember making paper mache boots with every mention of boot that was in the novel. It just has followed me throughout my life, and it just will always hold a very special place. And although it sort of seems like maybe it doesn't fit with The Awakening and Mrs. Dalloway and The Bluest Eye, Miss Havisham, Kathy, Edna Pontellier, Clarissa Dalloway, Pecola Breedlove, they are all women that are grappling with what's been imposed upon them. They're grappling with the society that they've been born into, the circumstances that they've been born into, and they're grappling with how they reject that, lean into that, or fight against that. The way I'm talking about it makes it seem like Miss Havisham is the central plot point. She's not. I mean, I wish she was. Someday maybe I would love to write a reimagining that, and I wonder if I should look into that. Maybe there have been reimaginings written from Miss Havisham's perspective. She doesn't even have a name. That is what's so interesting. She is simply Miss Havisham for her entire life. She has no identity outside of her father's name, which if she had been married would have been her husband's name. It's just, I've written so many papers about Miss Havisham. I'm obsessed with her. I've dressed up like her for a literary themed dance that my grad school put on. It's an interesting grad school program. So anyway, read it for Miss Havisham, but also the storyline itself is really interesting. There are 2 endings. Basically, Dickens was writing he was writing it serially, and it was published. And when he published the original ending, there was so much backlash that he had to rewrite it, and he rewrote an alternate ending. I prefer the original, the one that everyone was up in arms about. I think it's more fitting. So if you have read Great Expectations, let me know which ending do you prefer, because I'm fascinated by everyone's take on the endings. I want to give a couple honorable mentions for other classics that I really love, but wouldn't be my like desert island classics. So the first one I couldn't actually find. It's somewhere. I have to find it, but it's Jane Eyre. I do really love Jane Eyre. However, if you put Jane Eyre next to Wuthering Heights, I'm gonna go with Wuthering Heights. Jane Eyre, I love the gothic nature of it. I do love that we're so in Jane's mind the entire novel, but it is a little romantic at the end of the day. And I do really like the messiness that comes from Wuthering Heights. And I think that has more interesting things to say about society and about how we live our lives than does Jane Eyre. Now, secondly, I want to talk about Siddhartha, because I read Siddhartha first in 12th grade and then have returned to it since. It's really a philosophical novel, and it's all about the journey to self-actualization, and it is meant to be a sort of retelling of the Buddha storyline. If you are at all spiritual, or if you kind of lean towards any Buddhist practices, or even if you don't, but you're just kind of thinking about self-actualization and sort of self-improvement, this really does have some interesting things to say. And this is, again, one of those signature classics covers that I just had to have. It's just so beautiful. And yeah, here's a little quote: "Your soul is your entire world." What's the Mrs. Dalloway quote that they have on the back? The most classic one, or the most famous one, is Mrs. Dalloway decided she would buy the flowers herself. Oh yes, here it is. Mrs. Dalloway said she would buy the flowers herself. I always think about that every time I buy flowers for myself. And then I want to give an honorable mention to Native Son by Richard Wright. This is a novel about poverty and about race and class and about what downward trajectories your life can have when you make a sort of split-second decision. It's one of those ones that you really just want to give yourself time to dive into because it says so much about the experience that young Black men in particular are faced with. You'll really feel for Bigger, who is the protagonist of this novel. This truly is a really profound novel. I haven't actually returned to it in a while since I taught it, so I would like to return to it for sure. Okay, lastly, let's talk about a couple of the classics that I really want to read this year in 2026. So firstly, I really want to read Orlando by Virginia Woolf. I, as you just heard, adore Mrs. Dalloway, adore Virginia Woolf in general. Orlando questions gender, questions time. Also this cover, I'm just obsessed with this cover. So this is one, I actually do have 2 copies of Orlando as well, but this one and just all of the really interesting kind of modernist art and graphics. I'm really excited. Another classic that I am very excited to read is Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower. This is a post-apocalyptic but set in the 2020s novel and follows a group of people who are trying to continue to survive, and also a main character who I think has there's a magic system that is around kind of her extreme empathy for other people. I've heard wonderful things about this. It is a series, so I'm really excited to read this one and then hopefully pick up the others in the series. And then lastly, one that I thought I owned, but maybe I don't, which is James Baldwin, Giovanni's Room. Now, I have read this in the past, but it's been a really long time, and when I did read it, I don't think I quite understood the impact that this novel really did have on the queer community and also on classic literature in general. So I do really love James Baldwin, and Giovanni's Room is one that I want to return to and do a reread with fresh eyes. And there you have it. My favorite kind of desert island classics, the honorable mentions, and also the classics that I hope to read this upcoming year. Let me know down in the comments if you have read any of these, and also please let me know any classics that you love, particularly if they involve women sort of railing against the systems where they are in. Of course, I love The Handmaid's Tale, and The Color Purple almost made this list. There are just so many really wonderful novels, and I love looking at classics in not only the lens of what impact did this classic have when it was first published, but also looking at a classic with new fresh eyes and looking at a classic in the context of today and how it stands up and how we can reimagine and reinterpret and not place untrue readings or incorrect readings onto them, but taking a look at them through various identities and theories, I think really does make an impact and really is something that we should keep doing as we keep reading. What I love about classics is that they're not fixed. They change as we change. So something that I read in 6th grade or in 10th grade, now I read with completely different eyes, especially as a queer adult looking back at texts that I read before I understood my queer identity. Now there's such a different reading to each of those. And that is what I absolutely love about returning to classics over and over again. They sort of name parts of us that we do know are within us, or maybe they name parts of us that we didn't even know or don't yet know are inside of us, but they will be in the future. And that's why a classic kind of sticks around. Thanks so much for joining me as we just chatted books. Please do let me know in the comments, what are your favorites? Do you have any classics that, like me, have just sort of like followed you throughout your life? Or are there ones that you want to pick up soon? Let me know. Anyway, have a great rest of your day. I'm working on a few different videos that are coming out. One, I think, I don't want to promise anything, but I'm kind of planning maybe a romance novel video as someone who really kind of hates romance novels. And then I have a really fun nostalgic project coming. So subscribe if you want to see any of that, and I'll see you very soon in another video.